It's something that I can't come to understand. There are so many people within death row that claim that they love Tupac. How come no one has stepped up, come forward, put up $100,000, $500,000 reward for justice of his murder? Where's all the love for Pac from death row, from the people, and from the friends supposedly around him at death row? Where is the love for Pac? Let's bring justice for Tupac Shakur. I believe he's resting in peace in heaven, but on this earth, I bet you he's turning in his grave.
The exact same tactics that were used to drive the biggest acts out of Death Row Records, 15 years later, were being used against people like me, independent journalists. And I think that if people really knew the man behind the curtain, they'd think a lot differently about the murder of Tupac Shakur.
Don't make me have to play with you. That's just the tap that the principal used to give you with the ruler. Nigga, I'm gonna spank your ass. Say another word. I promise you, I want you to. Let's play. Let's have fun. Let's have a 2024. Great year, Negro. Cause I play both sides. Both sides, you know that. We can play it on social media. Nigga, please, okay? Either way. Because you ain't gonna be able to say, oh, it jammed. It jammed when I was getting out of the trash can. I was in the trash can and it... You ain't gonna be able to say that with me, nigga. They gonna be saying, oh, R.I.P. That's what they gonna be saying. You come fucking with Reggie, R.I.P.
By the year 2009, the Tupac murder investigation remained at a standstill. It saw Frank Alexander release a third documentary, doubling down on the contention that at least at some level, Death Row Records had an involvement in the shooting.
You, Layla, and Glow, I believe it's going to bring a lot to this here Reckoning Part 2. Because part 1, we really, I mean, you haven't watched it yet. You need to watch them in some time. We put it out there.
And while the film was made with the cooperation of Tupac's estate at the time, the movie struggled to find its audience. But speaking of struggles, the LAPD task force led by Greg Kading was also suffering from a credibility issue. In less than a year after 4 dozen convictions were overturned in Kading's other big case, Kading was removed from his task force, where it looks like he began making copies of the entire Shakur and Wallace case file. We just didn't find out why for another 2 years.
And then I never saw or heard of Kading again.
Right.
Yeah, I think that was his last day on the task force, I believe. And I got rumoredly that the prosecutor, the federal prosecutor, said that you're done. I don't want to even hear or talk to you or I don't want to see you. And then it was shortly thereafter I heard that he left the department. I couldn't find out if he was fired or he quit in lieu of or he retired in lieu of, but I just found out he was none of the department anymore.
If you pay attention to that timeline, right after Kading leaves the task force, Los Angeles police on Kading's task force suddenly change tactics, and they offer the Las Vegas police the opportunity to question Duwayne Davis about the Shakur murder. But there are strings attached. Wouldn't you think, to save themselves a headache, that they would want to solve it? So even when Los Angeles police tell Vegas the only interview they'll get with Davis has to be in Los Angeles, of course they are going to go. Oh, and I forgot one thing. Los Angeles police insisted that Greg Kading's partner and friend Darren Dupree also be in the room during the interview.
But if I were Long, I would have wanted to speak with Keefe and another Las Vegas PD officer with me and not had LAPD inside there. I want to speak to my witness with my other partner, but I don't need LAPD in there. There's no reason for that. Why are they in here?
But on September 9th, 2009, Detective Long from the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department met with the man Mr. Kading said was part of a murder.
And Kading's not here. He'd been taken off the case. With Kading's arrogancy, there is no way this would have taken place without him if he was still on the task force.
You're not going to hear Greg Kading tell you that one. The other thing you won't hear Greg Kading explain is why anyone thought it was a good idea to coerce a witness. Because in that very Davis interview, the moment Vegas steps out of the room, documents show Dupree coaching Davis on what to tell Vegas. He even tells Davis where to limit his story, so he can, quote, sleep at night.
In reading this transcript, once Detective Long leaves the room and you've got Darren Dupree and it looks like the attorney, they're completely leading Keefe on what to say and to stick to the story and not let Keefe speak freely. And instead, they're putting words in his mouth to say, this is what you need to state during this interview. If you stick to this story, you'll sleep well. If you don't stick to this story, you're not going to sleep well, and we're going to potentially cause problems for you, which is complete police coercion, which is crazy. It's not acceptable. It's hard to be believed, but I'm reading it, so yeah.
Now, I can't sit here and tell you that Mr. Davis was a genius for telling the story outside of the proffer session and after the proffer session and then writing a book about it and going on several YouTube channels to promote the story. But what I can question is whether or not Mr. Davis actually had any latitude to ever change that story or any motivation to recant the story out of fear for what might happen to him if he didn't tell the same story over and over again. He still had to answer to a detective that was on the Los Angeles Police Department who had a reputation of penalizing people that broke with the story they had agreed to tell. So if Mr. Davis says, well, I didn't really mean it, or I was put up to it, or I just told them what they wanted to hear in the proffer session, then you run the risk of pissing off somebody on the LAPD who's got a proven track record of hitting back if you change the story.
If you don't support the narrative, there will be retribution.
The real takeaway from the George Torres Ramos case isn't the fact of whether or not Greg Kading told a lie or whether or not he had, as the judge said, reckless disregard for the truth. That's immaterial, and it's a deflection. What's important about the George Torres Ramos case is that Mr. Kading was shown offering witnesses and informants money, cars, houses. So it doesn't really come as a surprise that by the time Keith Davis walked into a proffer session with Mr. Kading, we don't know what was told or promised to Mr. Davis prior to that meeting.
I feel like that there is a race to shape the narrative. Anytime new evidence is presented against the standard, it was Orlando Anderson, it was Keith Davis. But it was only a couple years before Kading showed the world what he had been working on since he'd left the police department. The 2011 book, Murder Rap.
What do you say to people who would say that Detective Kading retired and just wrote a book to profit from the death of these two stars?
Obviously, again, I retired and wrote a book, so there's truth to that. So I guess it comes down to what was the motive.
And this is nothing against Greg Kading. I don't have a problem with Greg Kading. I've never met him, and I've never spoken to him. Mm-hmm. But what I have a problem with is if you obtain evidence that you think can help the Las Vegas PD potentially solve a murder, and this is what Kading's thinking is, but instead you retire and you decide to go public with that information, shame on you for being a cop. Where's the professional courtesy? That's evidence that you should be passing on to this other jurisdiction, and you shouldn't be out there talking publicly about it.
When I first heard Greg Kading's narrative with Duwayne Davis and the whole slant on the Orlando Anderson narrative, I was actually very intrigued by it because it was a different spin on a 20-year-old narration.
Seeing this as his only option of staying out of prison for the rest of his life, and also being convinced that we knew what we were doing at that point.
Mr. Kading admits to having had several conversations with Mr. Davis prior to the infamous proffer session. And somehow in these conversations, it comes out that Davis claims to have something to do with the shooting of Tupac.
So I contacted Mr. Davis, who was in prison, and I wrote him a letter. I told him I was a documentary filmmaker and that I was interested in his story. However, I was not interested in his story if his story was any different than the story that Greg Kading had told in his book, Murder Rap. Now, the reason that I did that, of course, was because I was trying to fish whether or not Mr. Davis would stick to the story that Greg Kading was telling, or would he possibly have the opportunity to tell me, no, the story I told Mr. Kading is not the story that I have to tell you. I have a different story to tell you. And in that case, either it could be a made-up story, or it could be true, but just a different story than what he told Greg Kading. In either case, it was interesting to me enough that I wrote several letters back to him again, and we agreed to meet. What I believe that you told Greg Kading was what Greg Kading wanted to hear.
Yeah. You get out of trouble, this mother talking about 25 years. I don't even have no fucking 25 years left.
Yep.
You know what I'm saying?
So the federal agencies are not going to just take over a murder investigation unless it's part of a much broader investigation.
The FBI told me to sue her.
Well, there's some things about
They said they came to my house right before his book came out. So this guy's putting your life in danger. You sue his ass and the LAPD, city of LA. They told me everything. Do you want to move?
And with that book, a follow-up documentary, and a Hollywood version of his investigation, the Anderson narrative is given a new lease on life.
I had no idea about Greg Kading and what he'd already put out there. And when I became aware of it, that's when I told some of the people that some of these directors and producers I was working with and talking with, I told them this stuff that Kading's put out there is just flat out wrong. And I can prove it's wrong. And I said, how did this stuff even get out? I mean, who bought into this crap? Didn't anybody do their due diligence on what Kading was saying? And apparently the answer is no. I didn't even know the totality of all the bullshit that he had said. I just explained to them, this is the truth, this is what's happened, and they were shell-shocked because it was 100% different, apparently, than what Kading had put out there. And I said, well, look, he's wrong.
But if we have learned anything, we understand now that for every pound of pressure that pushes the narrative forward, there is an equal back pressure that works to repel any threat to that narrative.
Anytime new information is presented, there is an immediate response to try to spin the narrative back to it was Orlando Anderson and Keith Davis in the white Cadillac.
The second most controversial thing that we've done is that we came across a letter that was we call it the confession letter, that was given to us by Chris Blatchford at Fox News. And this letter was given to him in 1998. They had mapped out this entire, not only confession that they were involved with the shootings, but why the shootings happened, what was all involved with it to begin with. We went to the LAPD first with a confession letter, and we met with the highest members of the Los Angeles Police Department. Kirk Albanese, who was Assistant Chief of Police there, high-ranking captains in the LAPD, and Darren Dupree, who was Greg Kading's ex-partner. Russ and I gave them a copy of the confession letter. And within several days, that letter leaked. And we weren't going to even publish the names in the confession letter in the book until we had a chance to give it to the police first to investigate. Because who wants to be irresponsible like that?
No, of course not.
At the end of the day. So we did that. But again, like I said, nobody really has come back with, other than, oh, that's silly, a reputable
rebuttal to it, basically. Just saying, here's so you
There's
said
a
this.
rebuttal online, and what the rebuttal they did is they went into a guy by the name of Robert Soria, who was the guy who gave Chris Blatchford the letter. Because he was the one who gave the letter to Chris Blatchford, they say, well, he all made it up. He's a paranoid schizophrenic, and basically attacked the messenger.
Shortly after R.J. Bond and Russell Poole left the LAPD, I'm getting inboxed the evidence that they presented to them with a request to leak it out on the internet within hours of this meeting.
He's a piece, dude. That guy, he's just 100% bullshit. You know what that guy did with that damn video?
An example of shaping this narrative is on Machiavelli board, a Tupac forum, the investigator Greg Kading released a mugshot of Michael Moore and said, see, Michael Moore was there, and this is his mugshot from the night that he talked to police. The mugshot wasn't even a mugshot. It was for security clearance. It was a picture that had nothing to do with the case. This is how the narrative is being shaped behind the scenes and in public, and it should startle people that want truth, that want justice for Tupac.
I think that one of the problems that's plagued the Tupac Shakur investigation from the very start is that the only ones that seem to be willing to talk about the investigation are the ones that are willing to try to control the narrative or throw the narrative.
The judge is not going to let it go past today. If you can get lost and not get the peanut today, I think you'll be fine. Reggie?
They weren't willing to give any information, but at least that's what Vegas police were told, and we know the reason why many of their testimonies were suppressed.
I was never interviewed by any of the police agencies, the FBI, nor Las Vegas PD, and I found that to be a little strange because for the last week, I was with Tupac, and I didn't get a single question from anyone about what I thought, what my theory was on what happened, nor about the Nextel phones where I had heard the conversation that said, "God."
But what the police don't understand is that the same person that's pushing the narrative about the Orlando Anderson case is also actively suppressing the testimony of death row employees like Michael Moore, like Frank Alexander, people that had things to say, death row Dave Matthews.
At 3 o'clock or 4 o'clock in the afternoon in Las Vegas, at the Luxor, security was all brought together by Reggie Wright on the day that Tupac was shot, and we were told not to carry weapons. And did anybody ever ask why? No, because we were all armed. And did you find that kind of strange? We thought it was everybody. After the fight at the casino, and everybody thought it was strange. That why were guys told not to carry weapons? Even the cops that were there told not to carry weapons. Everybody was told not to carry weapons.
Anybody that could provide information that might have been helpful to the Vegas police were basically stonewalled and frozen out. Meanwhile, they're telling the Vegas police, go chase the Orlando Anderson narrative, go chase the Orlando Anderson narrative, and that's all Vegas police had to work with.
The Tupac investigation was massive. It occurred in front of a lot of people. It had a lot of exposure, and it included a celebrity. Now that changes it into level B. Since you got a celebrity now, the celebrity has lots of friends that have money. And the first thing they do is contact the boss, contact the sheriff, contact the police chief. They don't generally contact the investigator. They don't do that. They contact the bosses that control the investigators.
He said it right out of his mouth, and his girlfriend confirmed it. Who, Reggie? Yeah. What did he say? Say what you did. He said they want me dead. Yes.
You know, I'd talk about Suge Knight and Reggie Wright Jr., I'd speculate, and I'd put information out there just like anyone else. I never knew Reggie Wright Jr., the man.
Frank Alexander, who was Tupac's bodyguard, who was driving the car behind him, was someone we interviewed. And again, that first night, I don't think he was totally forthcoming on everything he knew. His story basically matched everybody else's. As the investigation progressed and we started getting more information, Frank was re-interviewed, and Frank was very much more forthcoming. In fact, he gave a lot of information that really helped as far as what we were looking at. It was quite obvious that that information pissed off some people.
Well, a time came where I did find out about Reggie Wright Jr., the man, and I'll say this to you. You don't want to be on the wrong side of it.
Do you know how many people seen that shit in prison? Do you know 2 days after that shit went out, you know I got fucking raped?
I feel like if you go against the narrative or you go against the grain, that's when the life ruination stuff happens. All of a sudden, I've got pictures of my house on the internet. Police are coming by to do welfare checks. I'm getting pulled over more frequently. People are trying to leak things of my business partners, ruin my relationships, all on the hint that new evidence could come forward. This is what happens when you go against this narrative.
Because you ain't going to be able to say, oh, it jammed. It jammed when I was getting out of the trash can. I was in the trash can and it... You ain't going to be able to say that with me, nigga. They're going to be saying, oh, R.I.P. What they going to be saying, you come fucking with Reggie, R.I.P. No threats, promises, bro. No threats. I'm tired of playing with you. I've been playing with you, reading your texts last 2 or 3 days.
This is an incredibly destructive pattern of behavior. They'll do anything to keep that narrative alive. And if you go against it, you're toast.
They don't want you around. What did I just say? Period. How you know? He said it right out of his mouth, and his girlfriend confirmed it. Who, Reggie? Yeah. What did he say? Say what you did. He said they want me dead. It was. He said that they said you told a lot of stuff against Suge and Buntree and Pac. The police. I did. Yes, they said that they got the police report saying that you said that Frank, I'm putting my ass in. You said that you said that Suge was kicking, that Buntree was, Tupac was beating the guy up also. I never said any of that. Well, and she said that the people at DRR want you dead. I never said any of that. Well, neither here nor there. You know, I don't know what to tell you. Whatever you call here for me, if he answered the phone, and he do put me on the phone, make it real quick. He don't trust me at all. I know. If I had not quit, I think he's gonna fire me this week anyway. He don't trust me, period. I want to come to you. Who was it? You said his girlfriend, Maria. What did he say to her? No, she told me that, asked me had I talked to you. I said, yeah, I talk to Frank all the time. I said, that's my partner. And she said, you know they bad at him. She said, Larry, they want him dead. He really said that, yeah.
It all makes sense now. Relatives Record came out in 2002, and that's how I ended up around Reggie Wright. I challenged him on graphics, of all things, for an album cover. And whatever I was doing, I was informed. Do not motherfucking touch anything. Do not fuck with our money. It wasn't until years later that I realized I had stepped into a situation, and I was the one that spoke the language to the distributor in order to get the advances. With something that you just said earlier in the interview, while we're doing this process, it made sense why he was so intense regarding releasing the album. Reggie was definitely delivering the album, and he thought I was stepping in the way, and I was only doing my job. What was crazy is it was on the old two-way pagers. I sent all of his messages on to one of my buddies so somebody had it, because I did not know what I walked into. I said, to hell with it, put it out.
When I didn't publish the information that they asked me to, I started being attacked about my personal life, my public life. I wouldn't say direct threats, but they were implied.
As time went on, this case had been reviewed multiple times by different investigators assigned to my section, but it wasn't until 2018 that this case was reinvigorated as additional information came to light.
My name is AJ Benza, and I'm an investigative reporter. 2018 is a magic number, but not for the reasons you might think. In 2018, a man by the name of Andy Donahue had the temerity to go to the Vegas PD and ask for a file on the Tupac case. 3 different times he sent FOIA requests to the Vegas Police Department, and they wanted nothing to do with the guy. Vegas is insisting this is an ongoing investigation. We can't release any information, but it's all BS. This goes on for a while, and the attorneys are up the Vegas Police Department's behind to try to get information, but the cops say, we can't give you anything because it's an active, ongoing investigation. So in this lawsuit, he basically tells the Vegas PD, you're not doing anything with this case. It's not active, it's not ongoing. So he says to them, since it's not active and ongoing, you have no reason to hold on to it. Let's call a spade a spade. So the Vegas PD is fighting this, and this goes on for a while.
The judge made Vegas PD produce an inventory of everything that is in the case file. Vegas had to then explain under what circumstances were they entitled to hold the records.
And I'm not even sure what they're fighting about because it's obvious that it wasn't ongoing. It's obvious they weren't doing anything with this case. But eventually, they have to give them something. There are 2,500 pages on this case, and they released 2 pages. What are you going to get out of 2 pages? So eventually, the Vegas PD loses this case.
The disclosure from Vegas PD was no surprise to anyone following this investigation. In fact, we learned, for example, that Vegas PD hadn't done a recorded interview with a witness since 1997.
Now, behind the scenes, there's a bunch of people in the Vegas Metro PD who know now they have to do something about it. They've got to show that this actually is possibly ongoing, this investigation, which it's not.
The bosses tell the investigator how they would like to see this handled.
So they dump 2 pages on him, and the Vegas PD appeals the case. But they're scrambling around trying to find something to make it look like, oh yeah, we're still on this. We're still looking. But they're not. Vegas appeals the case, and they lose. So what do? They take it all the way up to the Supreme Court. And guess what happens? They lose again. For Donahue, it wasn't so much about getting the documents. He just wanted to prove that this was not an ongoing investigation.
When Mr. Donahue received a copy of the 2 pages from the Las Vegas Police Department, one very important thing stood out to me, and that was the allegation by Detective Brent Becker in the report that the Cadillac was actually stolen and then recovered by the Vegas Metropolitan Police Department. In those case files, there actually is an evidence report from a vehicle that was stolen, and the police recovered it about a mile away from the shooting scene. Was it the white Cadillac? Well, that's what the report seems to allege. Why are we not hearing that from the prosecutor in Vegas? Why are we not hearing that from the Metropolitan Police now? Well, if you're Duwayne Davis and you have a defense and they've recovered a stolen vehicle and they've taken fingerprints and palm prints as they alleged that they did on a stolen vehicle, which may have been the Cadillac, the first question a defense attorney is going to ask were Mr. Davis's fingerprints or handprints on the stolen car when you lifted the fingerprints? If the answer to that question is then no, they weren't, you've got a real uphill battle from that point with a jury trying to convince them that Duwayne Davis did anything.
Based on police reports that are in the Las Vegas murder file, a car was recovered, but it doesn't say the make or the model of the car in the police report, but they say that they took fingerprints, latents, all that sort of stuff and gathered evidence. But if there's no documentation that explains why that police report of that stolen vehicle is in that file, again, a reasonable person would think it's in the file because it has to do with the murder. But why there isn't, I know in the FBI we would have what's called an insert, and it would basically be a description with the document attached to it behind, so you don't just throw a document in the case file and everybody's looking at it going like, well, what the hell is this all about? You have an insert that describes what that document is or what that piece of evidence is, and obviously why it has something to do with being put in the case file.
And you might ask yourself, well, then why wouldn't they just come out and say that the white Cadillac was stolen?
If this was just, I mean, I'm assuming in Las Vegas, there's probably crazy shit that goes on, such as stolen cars and all that all the time. Why was this particular stolen car put into this murder file, and the fact that it was recovered in close vicinity and in a close time frame of this murder? There's really only one reason you can really conclude why it was put in this file. It had something to do with the murder.
There's no downside to saying that the car was stolen and recovered versus you never got the car, which is what Vegas police are now saying. So you have to ask yourself which one's the truth.
Let me ask you a question. If you were the lead detective, would you want to be anywhere around from September 7th to September 13th every single year, the last 27 years, and answer every Tom, Dick, and Harry who has questions? And now that social media has blown up, there's so many more people outside of newspapers or curious reporters coming to you. It's a shit show. And that's what Donahue really wanted to show more than anything, that no one's doing anything about this. But if you're Vegas PD, you want to keep up the illusion that you're actually doing something about it. So you call it ongoing and active when it's not. So the Vegas PD has to prove they're doing something when they weren't. And suddenly, out of nowhere, they get a search warrant for Keith Davis's house. And it's a big show.
It's the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department. And a search warrant for the resident. You can come out with your hands up.
I mean, you would expect Siegfried and Roy to be there, or Chris Angel. I mean, they put on a show in Vegas.
I need you to put your shoes on. Put shoes on all the kids. And if you do me a favor, I need you to come out to the garage.
They made sure everybody knew what they were doing.
Put your hands up. Sir, you put your phone down. Put your phone down. Put your hands on top of your head. Hands on top of your head right now. Hold on, my boy.
You want to know the truth? Way back in 2009, Vegas police sat down with Keith Davis. They had that interview. Nothing came of it. So why what he said in 2019 happens to be so important? They sat him down already in 2009. They got what he had to say. It doesn't make any sense.
You still have the Orlando Anderson, Keith Davis narrative. You still don't have a gun. You still don't have a weapon. You still don't have an eyewitness. You don't have one single piece of physical evidence to even substantiate the underlying story other than the story that Mr. Davis has told. And they're saying that that's enough to convict him, but I have my doubts.
Instead of handle it truthfully and methodically, sometimes it gets sidetracked by the bosses saying we would like to see it happen this way. And if we don't see it happen this way, this could look bad. This could look bad. It could implicate the police department. It could implicate the powers to be, the mayor, the commissioners. It can involve anybody.
In our section, we knew at this time that this was likely our last time to take a run at this case, to successfully solve this case and bring forth a criminal charge.
So the reinvigorated Vegas team put together a grand jury and showed them 27 years worth of work. Well, that's not exactly true.
Instead of 27 years worth of work, Vegas prosecutors picked an unusual cast of witnesses to tell their story.
A Clark County grand jury has indicted Duwayne Keith Davis with 1 count of open murder with use of a deadly weapon with a gang enhancement.
Grand jury has enormous power. The grand jury has the power to indict on a felony case. And, you know, the old adage about a prosecutor being able to indict a ham sandwich is true.
This grand jury has been receiving evidence for months.
They presented witnesses that have absolutely no personal firsthand knowledge of anything that happened that night. Reggie Wright said he was on the other side of town. Bobby Ladd was in Compton. He had no one that was involved in the shooting. No witness of the shooting is testifying except for Malcolm Greenidge. And he didn't have anything that he could add.
Grand jury has subpoena power, which is an immense power that the grand jury has. They can subpoena witnesses to come before the grand jury and testify under oath. And that is a very powerful tool that the prosecutor has, because you get somebody in there, you put them under oath, they're stuck with their story at that point. Then you have it down,
and you have it under oath. So prosecutors use that power quite frequently.
We've conducted countless interviews and corroborated numerous facts that were not only consistent with the crime scene on the night of the incident, but also corroborated and were consistent with the sequence of events that night.
The witnesses that they used in the grand jury testimony to support the indictment against Mr. Davis were some of the most conflicted testimonies I've ever heard.
This ultimately led to us procuring a search warrant which was executed at Mr. Davis's residence in Henderson, Nevada. And following the execution of that search warrant, in close coordination with the District Attorney's Office, this case was presented to the grand jury, which ultimately led to Davis being indicted on charges of murder.
Prosecutor has basically no barrier to convening a grand jury. It's part of the prosecutor's job. It really does not take much of anything, either mechanically, legally, or any other way for a prosecutor to convene a grand jury. I mean, that's what they do. In many cases, the grand jury is an ongoing thing in larger counties, and it's very easy for a prosecutor to convene a grand jury.
Even Las Vegas's own police reports contradict some of the grand jury testimony that was given to indict Mr. Davis in the first place.
They're convened at the courthouse, sworn in by the presiding judge of the Common Pleas Court, and then the grand jury room is in the prosecutor's office.
Let's remember that most of the witnesses, except for Malcolm Greenwich, a couple of others, is dead. Everyone that's alleged to have been in the white Cadillac, with the exception of Mr. Davis, they're dead as well.
The standard in grand jury is probable cause. It's certainly not proof beyond a reasonable doubt. So it's relatively easy for a prosecutor to get an indictment if they want to.
And that's exactly what happened.
Please, come over here. Hey, man. Come over here, all right? Thanks, buddy. Come on over here. Appreciate your cooperation, okay? I'm gonna stand right here in front of the car. Yep, Fletch. Yep, go and put it down. Put that down for a second, all right? You got nothing on here, right? Hook so. You have anything on you, sir? Thirsty? Okay, yeah, we'll get you a drink. Hang on, all right? Just want to make sure you got no weapons on you or anything, okay?
Thanks to the great work of the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department under the leadership of Sheriff Kevin McMahill, Lieutenant Johansson, retired Detective Cliff Mogg, I am proud to announce the return of this document. This is the indictment we've been waiting almost 3 decades for. It spells out the facts and circumstances and what justifies a Clark County grand jury in returning an indictment.
And it's full of testimony from witnesses with zero credibility. Even Leonard Jefferson, the photographer that took that last deer in the headlights photo of Tupac, the last photo of him that was ever taken, his grand jury testimony actually contradicts what he said to Vegas police in the Las Vegas police files. He said in his grand jury testimony that he was so involved in the entire event and so close to the shooting that one of the people that were trying to help Tupac and Suge mistakenly tried to get in his car. By contradiction, the Vegas Police Department files say that at the time Mr. Jefferson told him he wasn't even around the scene.
We're not going to talk about any particular statements, but maybe he can address that, Globe.
I have said for a while, and I guess I'm still willing to stand on it, that if the case becomes a referendum on Greg Kading, he walks.
Then it's trouble. Then it's trouble.
I think they have a big problem because, again, the search warrant, fruit from the poisonous tree. The arrest, fruit from the poisonous tree. If everything that they base the search warrant on probable cause, let's say maybe they did come up with something new, but let's suppose that whatever that new thing was rooted in some I won't say malfeasance, but questionable tactics.
Right.
Okay. Everything that flows downstream from that is corrupted by that original thing. And the defense attorney just needs to go back to the source and say that the well water was tainted to begin with, and that everything that came out that he did on Gangster Chronicles and BET and all the things that he did there was based on an understanding that he had with this guy he was an informant for. You know, that's really what it comes down to. There's no magic here.
That's why I think there's got to be something else, because there's no way I can imagine. I mean, this is so high profile, it's ridiculous in terms of the entire world's going to be watching this trial. I mean, Tupac is still a well-recognized, well-renowned, artist out there.
What I'll say is there's a lot of stuff that's going to come out when it comes time for trial, but he provides his own series of statements that are very consistent with the evidence that we have on the scene that we've obtained through our investigation. I'll leave it at that.
There are many cases in prosecutions where you'll have the testimony of a witness, in many cases an eyewitness, and no what we call corroborating evidence to back it up. Then it is the province of the trier of fact, whether it's a judge or a jury, to judge the credibility of that witness with no corroborating evidence to determine whether that witness is telling the truth or not. And a lot of times that's a tough job for the trier of fact. Again, if it's a bench trial, it's a judge. Jury trial, it's a jury.
And now we have to bring up the issue of the witness list against Duwayne Davis, because it's turning out to be something of a circular firing squad. Because on the one hand, Bobby Ladd is saying, no, I think Orlando Anderson was the shooter. You have Greg Kading saying, no, I think Big Dre was the shooter. And both of these guys are witnesses for the prosecution, and they can't get their story straight.
Well, I think reckless disregard for the truth could be classified too as perhaps sloppy testimony.
Prosecutors generally tell witnesses when they know that they're going to be testifying at a trial, especially a murder trial, is they tell them to shut up. They tell them, do not talk to the press, do not talk to the media, do not do interviews. The minute you do that, you become fodder for the defense to be able to shoot holes in your credibility.
Maybe not a bald-faced false statement under oath, but maybe hypothesizing or something like that. And that's where opposing counsel comes in and has to keep an eye on something like that.
Which is why they will even sequester a witness in a hotel room for a month prior to trial, because they're that worried about outside influence, or that somehow their testimony might change or might be questioned by the defense. So they tell them, shut up. They tell them, don't say anything. Yet we find all these guys are running around doing interviews, and that's got to be a nightmare for the prosecution, because the more interviews I hear, the more the stories change.
I want you to remember in your questioning that this investigation, subsequent arrest, and now indictment is only the beginning of the process.
Because I think it was laid out perfectly, but almost too perfectly. You know, you have an incident at the MGM Grand, according to this narrative, and you have an immediate retaliation. It's a perfect story. But the more that you look into the events that unfolded that night, the more you start to doubt it.
And then we have this concept in law called fruit from the poisonous tree. Allegations of corruption within a municipality is definitely something that a district attorney or prosecuting attorney's office would take a look at it. It basically means that if the source of your evidence is tainted or unreliable, so is everything that flows from or comes after that first bad evidence, then the prosecutor will make the call whether it's a case that should be presented to grand jury.
From my experience in dealing with LAPD and a lot of the corruption cases that I was involved in that involved LAPD officers, they're very protective of themselves. They don't freely hand over information, and they when they realized they couldn't shut things down, then they wanted to be part of it to try to get ahead of things so they could obstruct it, which they did on some cases, and on other instances they got caught obstructing it, and my bosses finally caught on to that.
Was there any concern with the investigation that the LAPD had conducted and how that would conflict with the investigation that you guys were doing?
I'm going to choose not to answer that question.
I just don't believe a lot of the information being conducted there in LA was actually being shared with us.
You mean like that Duwayne Davis has been an FBI snitch since 1998? And what about the 12 to 15 times Davis informed for Kading's task force? And then you have the 2009 Vegas interview of Davis, being managed by Daring Dupree.
Las Vegas has jurisdiction on this. I don't understand why LAPD has such a vested interest, other than they want the publicity and the notoriety that comes from possibly solving this case. But this happened in Las Vegas's jurisdiction. I don't understand why Kading or anybody else at LAPD is just so entrenched with wanting to withhold information and just providing anything they can, resource-wise, as well as evidence, to Las Vegas Metropolitan PD.
And if you think a jury won't be confused enough, add Greg Kading's alleged federal proffer session with Davis.
Proffer deal is when you go into the prosecutor's office, the defendant always along with his defense lawyer, and you tell the prosecutor what you know. It's usually basically telling on someone else, another one that's charged with a crime or potentially could be charged with a crime. Your client spills his guts. The government then determines whether the information is valuable or not and what kind of credit that the person talking, normally your client, will get.
I think what people misunderstand sometimes is if I'm an LAPD officer or an FBI agent and I'm interviewing somebody and I bring them in and I kind of bring them in under this ruse of, okay, we're going to do a proffer, so you're going to kind of tell me everything that you know about this crime and any involvement that you have, and I'm not going to use that against you. That doesn't hold water.
We suggest you get an attorney and meet us at the U.S. Attorney's office, or give us a call and let us know if you'd be willing to sit down and have a conversation. He calls an attorney. That attorney calls us and says, when can we meet? We say, this afternoon is great. Why don't you meet us at the U.S. Attorney's office? And so that's what happened.
You have to have an assistant U.S. attorney write up a formal, legal binding obligation. Your defendant who's coming in for the proffer, in this case, it would have been, say, Keefe D., would have an attorney there. They would go over, the specifics of the proffer arrangement. Nothing's being promised, but nothing that he talks about can be used specifically against him. When you do a proffer session, and we've talked about this, very first paragraph, it talks about a proffer agreement between, and you would list who the AUSA is, and you would list who the attorney is representing. In this case, I guess it would be Keefe, and all the ins and outs of the proffer session. That's on the first paragraph of the interview.
I tell my clients when they go into a proffer that the government will ask them questions that they already know the answer to determine whether the person is being honest and truthful or not.
And then once we get to that meeting, his attorney, representing Keefe, and the U.S. attorney have a conversation, and that's when the agreement to cooperate is made.
Okay, that's the proffer agreement.
That's the proffer agreement.
Prosecuting attorney is going to go back and make a decision as to whether or not this really has any merit or has any, any value to it. And they're going to send that over to Keith Davis's attorney, who's going to look at it to make sure that all the I's are dotted, the T's are crossed, and he's not going to be talking about something that the attorney doesn't want him talking about. And then he's going to meet with his client, call his client on the phone here, what day do you want to do this and put together?
They've got busy days. You don't just call them up one morning and say, hey, I've got a guy that wants to come in and proffer. Let's do it this afternoon. No, it may take several days. It may take a week to put it together, because you've got to make sure that the other attorney has their slate cleared out for whatever time period, let alone that same day, and that everybody needs to be able to make it down there. It's just that's not how these things take place. Like Keefe you wouldn't just come in and say, okay, I'm going to sit down at the U.S. Attorney's office and I'm going to do a proffer session. This idea that you just bring somebody in and you sit them down and you interview them and you qualify that as a proffer session, no, that's wrong. It's incorrect.
This is just a situation where you sit down, you agree to honestly answer whatever questions we ask you about any criminal activity that you're involved in.
I tell my clients when they go into a proffer that the government will ask them questions that they already know the answer to determine whether the person is being honest and truthful or not.
The assistant U.S. attorney, they do all the questioning. Now, if I'm the case agent and I'm working with the assistant U.S. attorney, obviously I can interject a few things here and there, but I'm not the one that's leading the proffer session. That's the AUSA that's doing that. And in the recording that I've heard from Kading, he does all the talking. I don't even know if there's an attorney there. So that's not a proffer session. And also, when it's recorded, I think the recording that I've listened to where Greg Kading just starts doing all the talking, that's not how a proffer session works on the federal side.
But I've seen court documents where the state of Nevada claims they have no evidence of this proffer deal and can't validate its existence.
If there's no paperwork, there's no proffer session. It's as simple as that. It's a legal binding obligation.
And what it appears, and what y'all got to remember, is he don't want to be known. I knew my role. I know my role. I get shit filtered to me for being around to report to law enforcement if I had to or needed to be.